I was one of 5 children. Charlotte was the oldest. Then 18 months later, me, and 2 years later, Shirley, and then Joyce, and then Jimmy. And when Jimmy was born, Mother wanted a boy so bad, that's why she kept having one more. And when Jimmy was born, she hadn't had a name picked out, so Charlotte and I took a list and went around the neighborhood like 6 o'clock in the morning on a Sunday, asking people for ideas of names. And he was named James Walter, and Dad was with the International Harvester Company. He started out as an accountant and then a salesman, and then he did very well in his job selling farm machinery to the farmers. And then he was promoted to Lockman, which gave him a territory in Kansas and Nebraska that in which he sold to the dealers who sold to the farmers. And then the Depression came. This was many years later, and he was broke down from his Lockman job to part-time night watchman, which was a very, very hard thing to do, because Charlotte was just starting to to college at the time, and he had promised her she could go. So every nickel we could scrape up went for Charlotte's education, and Joyce got scarlet fever at the time, and in those days it was so bad that you could not expose her to anybody else. They had to, her skin all peeled off, her tongue swelled almost shut. There was we were quarantined. There was a quarantine sign on the house. It came at Christmas time, and Charlotte and my dad were not living in the house at that time because they couldn't come in because I remember he gave us gifts through the window, and we gave them some gifts through the window. But that was quite an experience, I remember. Getting back to when we were younger, Dad used to travel a lot during the week and be home on weekends. And I remember lots of picnics, lots of drives in the country, and my saying that I wished I was a cow someday, for why I don't know. But I got, in one of our picnic outings, I got into quicksand, and they found me just in time, because I had a hold of a twig trying to get out, and the more you try to get out, the more you get sucked in. And they were able to pull me out, and I certainly remember that. I remember another time when we all went running in all directions, and Shirley came back full of what is that stuff that makes you itch all the time?
Poison ivy.
Poison ivy. Her face swelled up that night to twice its size, and that was a terrible thing. I always will remember that. I remember an incident in my life that I will never forget. And Dad and Mr. Bauer next door had made an A-shaped swing out of lumber in the back of the yard for the 2 families to share. They had 3 children and we had 5, and they made that A-shaped swing out of lumber with 2 swings on it, and we spent many an hour there. Well, one night after supper, Shirley and Joyce and I were out there swinging, and a man came through the alley and picked me up and asked me some very private things that I knew were bad, and he wanted to feel my underwear, and he wanted to feel me all over, and said he would buy a doll for me and some candy if I would come with him. And
how old were you?
I was 8, and for some reason I knew that these words were bad, that he had to be bad to even say them. He asked me where my folks were, and I said in the house, and he said, where in the house? And even as young as I was, I knew something was wrong, and I kicked and scrambled to get out of his. He was running with me, and he dropped me. And I ran home and told the folks, and they went on the men all got together and went on formed a posse to look for this guy, but they never found him. About 3 days later, the newspapers came out, and his picture was in it, and I came running to Mother. I couldn't read much at 8 years old, but I came running to Mother and said, "That's the man, that's the man." And he had kidnapped a little girl around the block from us who lived in an apartment house and taken her out in the woods and chopped her up after sexually molesting her. So I used that as an essay for all through high school and college, and always got an A on it. I'd rather not have had the experience, however.
Yeah.
Dad was on the road during the week and home on weekends, and
What type of work did he do?
he was a salesman for the International Harvester Company, and then a blockman. I had explained that. And Mother gave Charlotte and I quite a few liberties because she had 5 children. We were the biggest help to her, so we always had to go to the store. As I remember when I went to the store by myself, and I was about 12 then, I would charge candy and just pass it around to all my friends, and they thought I was really something. And I kept doing this and kept doing this, and we had a big house in Mankato, Kansas, and I was in the bathroom off the kitchen. We had 2 bathrooms, which is something that was unusual at that time too. And I was in the bathroom off the kitchen. This was a Saturday morning, and Dad was asking Mother, "Look at these bills, Mother. I never noticed this before, but there's candy on here repeatedly. Do you know which one of our kids would do that?" And you know, they couldn't think that one of their kids would do that. And I felt so bad. I went up to him and confessed, and I didn't get spanked, but I really got a lecture. Shirley was quite sickly when she was little, and Mother spent a lot of time with Cheryl. Joyce won a beauty contest one time. The neighbor was a photographer for some company in Lincoln, and he begged Mother to enter Joyce, and she did, just because, to please him. And this was a couple weeks later, and she was looking through the Sunday paper, and she saw the first place winners to this contest and said, "Oh, look, Dad." And she turned the page, and here was this huge picture of Joyce that said Grand Champion Winner. And you could hear her scream all over the house. And,
Wow.
and Jolene, you look an awful lot like Joyce.
Oh, did you get that on tape?
When I was in junior high, Dad had taught Charlotte and I to drive because Mother didn't drive. And when he was out of town, she needed someone to go for bread and eggs and things like that. And I went out, there was a place in the country he liked me to buy eggs, and I went out in the country and bought eggs for 10 cents a dozen and bread for 10 cents a loaf at the grocery store. And I remember...
This would have been in the 20s, right? Roughly?
Early 30s, I think.
Okay.
I remember the grocer's son's name was Jimmy Sape, and he had red hair, and he liked me, and his dad would drive his horse-drawn sleigh which was unusual because we all had cars by then, in the wintertime, and pick me up, and we'd go for a sleigh ride. Also, I would go to the basketball games with Jimmy Sape and that I was hot stuff. Also, I'd walk home from him with him
you
from
were.
school, and I would. He asked me to stop at his house and put wave set in his hair and make waves, which I did. Woohoo! And later on, years later, when I was in high school, I always did mother's friends and neighbors' hair up. In those days, you used to put flaxseed that you would cook and make this gel to serve as to set the hair, and I'd put that on, and I had a way with hair and would. No, we wouldn't
It's
roll
just
it at
like-
all.
probably like,
We just
mousse
would
now.
wave it and put pin curls in it. Oh yes, when I was small, I would say about 8, Mother would send me to the store with a dime for a loaf of bread, and I had to pass the school on the way, and I could not. I was a tomboy. I climbed trees a lot, and I went on the swings a lot, and these poles that you turn over on, I couldn't resist, so I would stop on the way and put the dime in my mouth because I needed both hands, and swallow the dime, and couldn't get the loaf of bread, and I wasn't sure what I was going to do. I had to go home and tell Mother, and she didn't like that very much. I did quite a few things.
Didn't they make you wear bloomers because you
Oh,
kept turning?
when I went to school, I turned over on those all the time, and the principal came down and got me. They had warned me several times not to do that because it would show my bloomers, my pants. So she came down and got me by the ear and took me to her office and said, "I've told you many times not to do this. Now I'm going to talk to your mother, and you have to wear black bloomers," which was a disgrace. So I did my stint with the black bloomers. After that, my mother must have a soft spot because she sewed all our clothes, and she would make underpants to match my dresses. But I got back at the principal because I would go to school before school started and turn on those, and stay after it was over and turn on those.
What kind of car did you have when you were real young?
An Essex. We had an Essex, and it was a one with isinglass windows.
What's that?
It's an imitation glass, and they were put on with snaps on material. Canvas, yes.
Was that like old convertible windows in the back? How they?
Yes, but it also had a roof,
Oh, okay.
soft
All right.
roof. There was another kind, too. Yes, I lived in Lincoln until I was about 10, and then we moved. Dad was transferred to Hastings, Nebraska, and then to Belleville and Mankato, Kansas, before we moved back to Lincoln. And I was trying to think of some of the things that I did. Oh, while I lived in Kansas, I sort of became a teenager, and I was aware of all these things, and I got the first high heels I think they ever sold anybody as young as I was, and the neighbor girl, she used to envy my legs all the time. But I ushered at a theater, had to wear a Spanish outfit at the theater with a
Cumberland?
big red cummerbund with a bolero jacket and white long sleeve blouse. They furnished the costumes, and I ushered with those high heels on. I thought I was the cat's meow.
Before we move on to your high school years, what do you remember when you guys were young? What form of discipline did your parents use?
My dad was very strict and very kind at the same time, but he meant business, and when we misbehaved, he'd send us out in the yard to get switch our legs with
That
her.
was a stick from a tree?
Yes.
Okay.
Or spank us with. Yes.
How about you, Dad?
I don't remember any discipline. In my early years, one thing my dad wouldn't stand for is for me to sass my mother. And I'll never forget one time, he'd been, in the evening, he just finished milking the cows, and he was coming to the house with milk, and he heard me sass my mother, and he set those 2 buckets of milk down and came in the house and got the razor strap and really let me have it. In those days, a razor strap was about 2.5 feet long, and it was 2 pieces of leather that they used to sharpen their straight edge. And boy, he really let me have it. But in the meantime, the cats came and got in the milk, so he lost all the milk too.
The tape that you just heard was sometime during 1989. Now I'll cover the period from the time we met, up till the time I left for the war. This is Labor Day, September 6th, 1998. All of the kids came over with the grandchildren. We had Kentucky Fried Chicken and so forth, and some cookies and whatever. I'm proceeding to tell you of the time that Mary and I met. I started with the Kresge Company, and I was supposed to be in the stockroom for about 2.5 years. Well, the junior assistant manager was fired, and they brought me up on the sales floor, and I became a junior assistant after 3 months. That made me feel pretty proud inside. Anyway, we have closed an old store and built a new Kresge store, and I stayed at the old store and while everybody laid out the new store and closed it up. Well, as time went on, we had 2 senior assistants as well as the manager. And Mary at that time was she managed the notions department. Is that picking that up? And anyway, really didn't have any relationship, but she was telling our senior assistant that she and her sister and 2 girlfriends were going up to Omaha, Nebraska for Golden Spike Days. Now, Golden Spike Days was the day they celebrated when the railroads met from the East Coast and the West Coast at Omaha, Nebraska, and they drove a golden spike in commemoration of this event. So they were having a celebration, and Mr. Lindstein, who was a senior assistant, heard them talking about it, and they said, well, why don't you ask Mr. House to go? So she did, and I said, can I bring a boyfriend along? And they said yes. And so we went up to Omaha, and of course we visited the various taverns and did a lot of dancing and so forth. So Mary asked, what do you want, the front or the back seat? And I said, what do you think? That was the beginning of our relationship. And I would see her frequently. And things started getting pretty serious. Now this trip to Omaha was in June, and in
What year?
I don't remember the year, probably it was 1939.
So you dated for a couple of years before you were married?
Well, yes, but I had proposed to her, and we, at that time, we couldn't fraternize with the employees. So nobody knew. We kept it a secret. And this was for quite a while. And I had a bet with the pet supply girl that operated the pet department that she couldn't sell as many goldfish and birds. We had a special promotion as I thought she could, and she said, oh yes she could. Her name was Jennifer. And after the contest was over, one Sunday morning she called me and she said, I have my brother's car and I'm ready to pay off the debt. And she was going to buy a pint of whiskey, I guess, or something like that. Anyway, as we were ready to leave her brother's house, another girl from the store came over, and her name was Helen Harrison. And so we had to tell her what we were going to do. We were going to go and pick up Mary Smith. And this was when we picked up her sister too. Anyway, so Jennifer drove the car down, and I had told Jennifer about Mary and I. And so, but we hadn't told Helen at the time. So we went down and picked up Mary, and I got in the driver's seat. Oh, I was driving, that's what it was, and Mary got in the front seat beside me, and Jennifer got in the back. And Helen couldn't understand it. Here I had Jennifer's brother's car, and Mary is sitting in the front seat with me. So then we had to explain to her. Anyway, this is a time when we were going up to see my parents, and we left late on a Saturday night. And we went and picked up Mary's sister Charlotte, and then we went on to Sioux City. And my parents were in bed, and we woke them up, and so they had ice cold watermelon, and we stayed there for a couple hours or so. And then we wanted a little more excitement, and Mary had played the piano because she played the piano by ear, and my mother had a piano. So anyway, we decided we'd head back, and instead of going straight back, we went over to South Dakota. The borderline of South Dakota is close to the Iowa borderline, and they had roadhouses, so you could go there and get drinks and dance and so forth. So we went over there and spent probably another couple, 3 hours, and here it is after midnight, and we headed back. And of course we had to drop Mary's sister off, and Mary would open up the window every now and then to keep me awake because I was getting sleepy. And we got in then at 7 o'clock on Monday morning, and we had to be in at work at 9 o'clock. So we showered and everything and went to work. Well, as time went on, we would go to dances in small country towns. And this one couple that knew about us would go with us, and they'd go in to see if there was anybody there that we knew. You know, if there wasn't, well, then we'd go in and we'd spend the evening dancing and so forth and go home. Well, then I had asked Mary to marry me, and of course she said yes. What else could she do? Anyway, she had they had an apartment. 4 girls had an apartment, and so Mary had taken the afternoon off and prepared fried chicken, and I was going to come over Friday evening, and she burned her finger with this hot batter. Well, we were going to go and pick out a ring for her the next day, and whenever they'd put the ring on her finger and put it under that bright light, why, that burn spot didn't feel very good on her finger. Anyway, we picked out the ring she liked and what I could afford. Today, you need a microscope for it, but that's the way it was. But she didn't wear her ring. Then finally, we decided that she was going to get another job. So she had written me a note and had asked the manager, Mr. Fenton, to see him sometime during the day. Well, the girls' lounge and the offices were up on the 2nd floor, and she'd been up to the lounge and was coming down the steps when Mr. Fenton was going up, and he said, Mary, did you say you wanted to see me? And she said, yes. And he said, well, come on now. Well, she had this piece of paper in her hand, didn't know what the devil to do with it. And he took her into the office, and she was fumbling with it, so he reached over and took it. And it said, honey, I'm going to tell Mr. Fenton today. And he said, who is this, honey? And she says, Mr. House. And he laughed, you know, really ha-ha. And he says, how long's this been going on? And she told him, and he says, well, if you've kept it this quiet all this time, I'm not going to make a big issue of it. But this was in January, and he says, I'm going on vacation. And when I come back, I'll help you get another job. Well, Mary had already applied for a job in the fur department in the department store, so it looked like she was going to have that, but she didn't tell him. Anyway, he says, well, where's your ring? And she says, well, I didn't wear it because I didn't want anybody to know. And he says, well, come Monday morning, you wear that ring. So she did, and she was up in the lounge, and they spotted the ring right away, small as it was. And they said, well, who's the guy? And she said, Mr. House, and nobody would believe her. Anyway, we had a floor lady. She was a good-sized woman. And she said, well, wait till Pop Fenton gets back from his vacation. She says, House is going to get his. So the morning he was back from his vacation, we had a buyer's office, and it was right off of his office, and there was the grill work in the door. And I heard her coming down the terrazzo floor, and her hard heels hitting that, and I knew that she was up to no good. Well, I heard her talk to him, and pretty soon I heard him say, "Minnie Fisher, you get your carcass out of here, or you're going instead of Mr. House." So that squelched all of that. But then anyway, the next week she had her job at the department store. Well, then as time went on, we made plans for the wedding, and Mary's mother made her wedding dress, and you can tell by the picture it was beautiful. Most of the expenses we had to take care of because nobody had any money. And so then we made the plans and picked out the invitations and all of those things. So then we were married in the Second Presbyterian Church in Lincoln, and our minister was Scottish, and he was a comical fellow. But anyway, then we were married, and they took what few pictures they took in those days.
Who stood up in that?
And tell us what the reception was like.
The reception was at the church basement, and we had ice cream and cake. Then we left and went to Mary's house, and all of our friends and cars lined up, and we took off for Omaha and had this entourage of all these people following us too. And we went to the Colony Club in Omaha, and we danced and things, and then Mary and I decided it was time to get out of there. So we had a reservation at the Hotel Fontanelle, the nicest hotel in Omaha. I still have the receipt. $6 for the evening, or for the night.
And this was 1941.
Yes.
How much would that be today?
Well, hundreds of dollars. But can you imagine that? Anyway,
Who were you married on?
oh, well, the bridesmaid was Jean Payne, who came here on our 50th wedding anniversary, or 40th. And she was a bright redhead, just like Mom was.
Did she spell it like Bob?
Yeah, P-A-Y-N-E. Yeah.
And when she came at your 40th, the skirt she was wearing was made out of the bridesmaid.
Yes, it was made out of the bridesmaid.
Yeah.
Yeah, there was Maxine Failing and Irene Peterson. And anyway, you know, we didn't have a lot of money for
Who was the maid of honor?
Jean Payne was maid of
Who was
honor.
the best man?
Edgar Gates.
A friend of yours?
Yes. You heard me mention, well, I guess you didn't. This friend that went up to Omaha with us was Paul Cruiser. And he was to be the best man, but he had been drafted into the Army, so Edgar Gates became the best man. Well, let's see, where was I?
After your night at the hotel?
Oh, and we were about ready to bed down, and somebody was knocked on the door. And I thought, my God, what's this? And there's another couple, and they wanted to borrow our rings so they could go to Papillion, Justice of the Peace, and get married. And I said, over my dead body.
A couple that you knew?
Oh, that was in that group, yes. And there was a justice of the peace, Papillion, which was a small suburb of Omaha, who would marry people, but they had to have rings. Well, anyway, I didn't let them have it, and that was it.
Did they end up getting married?
No, they never did get married.
Oh.
Ah.
So,
Probably started the fight then. Yeah.
a friend of ours, Jerry and Stan Harris, she had roomed with Mary's parents. She roomed the house there, and so she got to know the girls very well. And so Mary introduced her to Jerry, and he was Jewish. Anyway, they ended up getting married. Well, they invited us to spend our honeymoon with them down in Kansas City. So we took the train down in Kansas City, and they had a lovely home, and they had a Swedish maid, and our bedroom had blue satin sheets and our own bathroom and so forth. And so we thought that was hot stuff, and if there wasn't anything at the table, she'd ring the bell for the maid to come. Anyway, and then we sang some songs, and so they took us around to one of the first shopping centers in America, in Kansas City. It was Nichols Place, it was called, but it was one of the first shopping centers in America, and it was kind of interesting. But anyway, they gave us a grand tour of the city and treated us very well for 3 days. Then we headed back to Omaha. Now, this is one of the couples we hadn't seen for 40 years that we visited when we made our trip through Florida. And in the meantime, I was a manager of the Kresge store, and Stan was coming up there on business, so he came and visited with us, and we had him stay overnight. And that was quite a reunion. But there's this, then, let's see.
Tell us about setting up house and getting started as young.
Oh, okay. Our first apartment was a bedroom, living room, and kitchen and bathroom.
Where was it at?
And this was on 2828 P Street in Lincoln, Nebraska.
Wow, it's so
Yeah, and so that was our first apartment, and I used to ride the bus down to work every morning. And then, now this was in the time that the war was taking shape in Europe. And well, this happened December 7th. Mary had invited her boss out. He was from New York, and had invited him out for dinner. And as we were having dinner, the news came over, and President Roosevelt announced the attack from Pearl Harbor. Well, within myself, I knew one day I would be involved. Anyway,
How old were you? 25?
I don't remember.
I think you were 25.
Anyway, I thought I'll join the Air Force. And so I went up to Omaha to take the tests. And I couldn't take the thing that they put you in. And I just couldn't take the dizziness and so forth. So then I decided, well, I'll wait till they draft me.
Were you still in college at this point?
And so then we gave up the apartment because I thought I may be drafted, and went to live. We rented a room from Grandpa and Grandma Smith. And that was, we were there for about 6 months or so, and looked like I wasn't going to go, so we rented another apartment. And this apartment had a kitchen and a bathroom and a living room, no bedroom. You had a wall-in bed that you let down out of the wall. And so, and it was upstairs, and we made it do. Of course, there were incidents that happened at Grandpa Smith's, and I'm not going to bring it up here now. But anyway, then I got word. Let's see. And Pam was born then in February. And then I got word that I was going to be drafted in July.
That was 1943.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So then I went off to war. And I'll tell you, is it done?